Last time our study of Luke 7 began, we saw there are four paragraphs, four sections in Luke 7. Jesus' healing of the centurion's servant, the section we looked at, which is also in Matthew 8. The section we'll begin with tonight, Jesus raising the widow's son, and then the messengers who come from John, who ask questions about Jesus, and Jesus sends them back with an answer, and then gives a discourse, a complimentary discourse about John, and then the sinful, grateful woman who was overcome, having been forgiven by Jesus. And so that'll be our study again. We looked at the foreigner, the one of whom it says Jesus was amazed, or Jesus marveled at the man's faith. And so we think about how many things amazed Jesus. Not many in the scripture, is there? There's a number of things that disappoint him. There's a number of things that provoke him, but to amaze or to cause him to marvel in a positive way, that is but few and far between. I think it's part of Luke's note and special purpose of his book is Jesus is explained in Luke to the Gentile world. You know, Matthew, we have all those prophecies fulfilled. I heard this last week, I like it, I think I'm going to borrow it. Somebody said that Matthew, in many ways, is the 40th book of the Old Testament, because it's so much about prophecy and so much of the fulfillment. So Matthew shows that Jesus is the Messiah the Jews should all believe in. But Luke shows the universality of the gospel, with a special note, as we mentioned in the introduction a few weeks back, of care for the poor, care for women, and we'll see that in chapter 8 also, care for foreigners, care for the outcast. And so in Matthew, Jesus is as Jewish as could possibly be, because he is the promised Messiah that the law said would come and the prophet Moses said to look out for. But in Luke, he's the universal Savior. And so it is this foreigner who impressed Jesus so much. And it is this centurion, and we mentioned the numerous positive mentions of centurions throughout the New Testament. So this foreign centurion who will be welcome into the kingdom, though many of the Jews will end up being rejected. All right, so we looked at him. Now, as Jesus moves on from there, and Luke gives us this time indication there in verse 11 of soon afterwards. So it's not long after being there in and around Capernaum. Jesus is off to another place. And so he went to a town called Nain. Nain is a little hillside village. Of course, in the ancient world, a lot of the villages were built up on the high ground, much more easy to defend. So 24 miles southwest of Capernaum was a small village of Nain. And as was often happening with Jesus, wherever he would go, great crowds would follow. So Jesus and this great crowd are walking up the hill to go up into Nain. And as he draws near to the gate of the town, there's another group going the other way. And one group, we can think about them in happy, excitement, joy. They're walking with Jesus. And this other group that's coming now down the hill out of town, exact opposite situation. They are sad because of the occasion. Behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, who was a widow, and a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And so a considerable crowd from a small town. So evidently everybody knew the sad situation, and they are there paying their respects. They are there following along in this funeral procession. And there, just about the gate of the town, these two crowds meet. The great throng coming up the hill with Jesus, and the considerable crowd coming down the hill in the cortege, funeral cortege, is that the right word? In this funeral procession, as they come, and they meet there on the road, and it said the Lord saw her, and he had compassion on her, and he said, "Do not weep." And then he came up and touched the bier, and the bearer stood still. So my translation, my English Standard here, it says he touched the bier, B-I-E-R. A lot of other translations will have the word coffin. Bier is probably the more technically correct English term here, although it's almost never do we use this term of bier. Of course, it's from this passage that my friend tells me, has told me years ago, one of those famous preacher jokes. When is it okay to have a beer in church? During a funeral. Of course, what kind of beer is it talking about? And what is this word beer, by the way? B-I-E-R. So in today's terms, it would be the flat stand you put the coffin on. And so, yeah, it would be for back then. This one was, I'm sure, be more rude. I mean, this is not that fancy metal rolling thing that we use now, right? This would have probably been a flat platform. A flat platform could be wood, could be canvas, so stretcher-like, and it's the platform for where you lay the body or carrying the body, and the body was probably like Jesus when they would have prepared him for burial. Of course, probably not as elegantly as what was planned for the Lord, although they didn't need it. But the body wrapped. So the body wrapped, laid on this platform or this stretcher-like thing, and then carried. So they're carrying the bier because most English speakers no longer know that word, and we never use it. The majority of modern English translations just say he put his hand on the coffin, but it probably actually wasn't a coffin because they didn't usually bury people in wooden boxes as we do now. So we would have had a wrap body on a platform or on a stretcher type thing. So Jesus reaches up and touches that, and he heals the man. He raises the man. Young man, I say to you, arise. And the dead man sat up and began to speak. And so we have the first of three times in the Gospels where Jesus raises somebody from the dead. And so this is, of course, an absolutely extraordinary miracle. In the next chapter, Jesus will raise Jairus' daughter from the dead, just within minutes or an hour of her passing. And then, of course, the most famous one, Lazarus, who is raised days after his death, after he's already been fully buried, and all the procedures and rituals and requirements of burial are long done. So we have three where Jesus raises the dead. It's interesting, in the Old Testament, there were three as well, associated with Elijah and Elisha. So Jesus here, in the front of these two massive crowds who had met in the road on the side of the hill going up to Nain, Jesus has healed, he's resurrected this young man, and it's such a blessing to his mother, because this widow, that's her only son and her only means of support. It's such a blessing to the widow to have her son back. And it says, right in the text, Jesus felt compassion for her. So we've talked about that before, the multiple aspects of miracles. Miracles accomplish a number of things all at the same time. What does a miracle accomplish? All right, so we have here, it's not usually directly stated. The compassionate aspect is not normally directly stated. It is often implied, it's often pretty easy to see. When the 10 lepers come up, what do they say to Jesus? Have mercy on us, right? And what did the blind sometimes say? Have mercy. So they'll come and ask, and they'll say, have mercy on us, Jesus. And what does he do? He shows mercy. So there's a compassionate aspect to miracles, and we really find, I think, just but maybe one miracle in the whole New Testament that is not a compassionate miracle in regard to people, and that is Paul striking a false teacher blind. I suppose Jesus cursing the fig tree as well. That is not a compassionate miracle. So those two are just absolute demonstrations of power. By the way, before I forget it, and so it'll stick in your mind, and hopefully it'll stick in mine, I did not know this, but I have read and studied and seen this several times in the last couple of months about a fig tree, that the fig tree was the national symbol of Israel. Like we have, the eagle, or we have the flag. We have these national symbols. And when Jesus curses that fig tree, it's not just that he's cursing a tree because it doesn't have fruit because he's hungry. It's an emblematic and lesson miracle of this is what's happening. This is what's going to happen to this nation who's killing their Messiah. And so there's several passages that if we think of the fig tree as a national symbol of Israel, it makes, I think, more sense and adds more depth to understanding to what's going on. All right, so aside from the cursing of the fig tree and the striking of the false teacher blind, I think every miracle otherwise I can think of has a compassionate aspect. Also, it has this authoritative aspect, which means listen to the one who can wield the power of God, right? What does the blind man say and argue to the Pharisees who want the blind man to deny Jesus who healed him? And what does he say? How could he do this unless God is with him? It's never been heard of such a thing that somebody healed the blind. And you read through the Old Testament, and there's a lot of notable miracles, but is there even one healing of the blind in the Old Testament? I can't think of one either. And so that is a notable thing, and the blind man's right, formerly blind man is right. This is a confirmation that God is with this man. So this power, authority, confirmation aspect of miracles. And there's one more that we especially see in the book of Acts. It's pointed out repeatedly by Luke, that when a miracle occurs, people are amazed or marvel. In the next chapter, in chapter 8, we're going to see people are terrified. So there's this shocking of the mind aspect of miracles. To get people to see that something great is going on here. And miracles are often called signs as they point the way. So this opening of the mind, this direction, this authority, this command, and compassion. All these are present in nearly every miracle. So here, again, the compassion aspect is directly stated. So we have the compassion of Jesus to work this miracle, and the people see this. It says in verse 16, fear seized them all, and they glorified God. So in fear and awe of God, they glorify God, and they say, a great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people. So one like Elijah or Elisha is here, and he's in our town. He has come and visited us, and he has helped this woman. And, with this great crowd of people going to the funeral, how many people in town would have known this woman and known of the situation, right? Everybody would have known about the situation. And most people probably would have known her personally. And many people in a small town would have known this 18-year-old young man, right? And now, for years, as he goes about his daily business and about Nain, what is he a walking reminder of every day? The power and compassion of God. And so they say a great prophet is here. God has visited his people. And then in what must be a bit of an understatement, verse 17, the report spread throughout all Judea. I guess so. Don't you think the word of that was spread? Word did. So the compassionate miracle for the woman. All right, so that is the widow of Nain. So I'm sure there's more we could draw, but questions, comments as we go. That's an Old Testament. Yeah, that is an Old Testament. I mentioned New Testament. I mentioned the two exceptions of non-compassionate miracles. In the Old Testament, I think we'd find a great number more. In the Old Testament, a great number more non-compassionate miracles. Again, display of power on people in a way of judgment. Like the striking of the false teacher, all the 10 plagues of Egypt, right? The great mighty acts of God, compassionate on Israel, causing them to be released. But I don't think many of the Egyptians thought of the 10 plagues as compassionate miracles. So yes, in the Old Testament, we find a great number more of miracles of the non-compassionate, just the absolute display of power type. Which is twice stated. We are right to talk about that because it twice specifically says, here's the purpose of miracles, or here's a purpose of miracles. Right. Yeah, it is the great power of God. As these people say, a great prophet has arisen and God has visited us, right? And visitation means, to look in and check and to see about their whereabouts. So God has sent somebody concerned about us to help us. That's what visitation means there. So, So just to say, that if we say just say, it confirms the word. That is true as far as it goes. But that looks upon these people just as objects to be used. They weren't. They are objects of compassion from God and the Son of God, and great things happen to them and for them, right? And that summary and this is probably what helped me view this compassion aspect as more seriously than I had probably had before. That wonderful summary of the work of Christ that Peter gives to Cornelius. He says to Cornelius, who was, what city was he in? Right on the seacoast. Caesarea, wasn't it? Caesarea. He says to the Gentiles who lived right on the outskirts of Judea, he said, you know about Jesus. So So I'm just going to remind you real quick because you know about Jesus, how he went about doing good and healing those oppressed by the devil. And so Peter's summary of Jesus' ministry is doing good and healing. And this definitely falls under the what? Doing good. In the next chapter, we're going to have a powerful healing of somebody possessed by many demons. So we have those exact match up with the summary and what Peter says. So here's the doing good. So it's a doing good, but it's a doing good that points the way and causes them, and these people get it. This is a great prophet, and God visited his people. And so now you fast forward 2.5, 3 years from now, maybe not quite that long. You fast forward 2 years, and some of these people are in Jerusalem on Pentecost, and they preach that Jesus is the Messiah who died for sins. Or just a few weeks after that, people get up to Galilee who had heard in Jerusalem what was preached. And somebody comes to Nain and says, remember that guy who healed that guy right there 2 years ago? He really was the Messiah. He died for our sins. And now the message is, we believe in him and we're baptized and we follow him. And what do you think the response in Nain's going to be? I would hope it'd be pretty good, right? Because 2 years ago, he healed that guy who's still probably living here. And he raised him from the dead. And so, would it be hard in Nain for them to recognize, or would it be hard for them to accept that Jesus was raised from the dead? You wouldn't think so, because why? That guy who's now 20, that guy who Jesus raised from the dead is still with us. Oh, he raised him from the dead, and now he's raised from the dead. Oh, okay. All right, so that report goes everywhere. All right, then, unless there's more on questions or comment? John the Baptist now. And I have to say, I'm always a little troubled and have been for a long time about what exactly John sent to be asked. The disciples of John reported all these things to John. So John's been in jail, right? He's been in jail for telling the ruler, the Herod that's up in Galilee, because Pilate's the governor of Jerusalem. The Romans have a direct rule of the area right around Jerusalem. But up in Galilee, they're under one of the Herods. And John was thrown in jail by the local ruling Herod because he didn't like the message and the morality that John was teaching, and that condemned him. He had John thrown in jail, and John's been there a while. So we think that John may have been in jail between 6 and 9 or 10 months between his arrest and his death. So for a third, maybe not quite that, for a quarter of Jesus' ministry, and John got him started. John did his work as a forerunner. John got everybody ready for the Messiah. He kept saying, that's the one who's coming. He's the Messiah. He's going to do all these things. And now John has been in jail for months. And so it's reported by disciples of John that Jesus is doing these things. He's healing, people. He's preaching. He's raising the dead. And so John has 2 disciples, and they are sent to the Lord, and they say this question: are you the one who is to come, or should we look for another? And they go and faithfully relay that message in verse 20. Are you the one who is to come, or should we look for another? And I have to say that's always been a troubling thing to me that John asked that, because what does it sure seem like? Sure looks like doubt to me. That's what seems obvious at first reading. Are you the one, or is there somebody else? Now, what had John said? All the records of what John had said were how clear? How clear were the statements of John at the beginning of all the Gospels? They were unbelievably clear. And we could read any of them, but you know them. This is the one. He's mightier than me. I'm not worthy to unloose his sandal. This is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And again, not that this may be, but what this is. And so, is there a credible way to read this that doesn't seem like doubt or wavering? He has been. It says it is the clearest possible statements of who Jesus is. They're just right. There's absolutely, we all agree, there's the clearest possible statements.
God knew what his role was.
He is.
Knew what was going to happen. But he said, Christ must increase, I must
decrease, right?
decrease. I would look at it from a minute saying is that this is not an example of doubt. This is saying these guys coming back, these 2 men coming back,
Well, that is I believe that is the end of it. I believe that is the effect of everything that occurs. That John is commended, that Jesus has given whoever's asking, and it sure seems to me when John sends them saying, "Ask these things," it seems like John is asking that these questions be answered for him, not for the other disciples that he's with. But if he sent them to ask for their sake to elicit a response from Jesus, I guess that might be a way to have this without John doubting. But I don't know that we need to protect John from that. It's because he was a year and a half before, absolutely clear. I think we can see in our own lives and in the life of faithful people recorded in Scripture that there's a time where there was absolute clarity and confidence, and a year and a half later, there was a bad time. And the difference between the faithful and the unfaithful are that the faithful pick themselves up from these times. They don't stumble at these times. They have bad times. They have terribly trying times, times of even some wavering, but not time of falling to be destroyed.
Yeah, I think you looked at it. I don't understand why it's so problematic. I mean, Elijah's suicidal.
Right.
He's the last one. Just let me die, God. I've done what you want me to do. Just let me die now. I mean, Job, he went through some doubt.
Yep.
I mean, doubting does not mean you're not a Christian. It means he's going through stuff that we probably couldn't imagine. I think if he wants some reassurance, it's just showing he's human.
I think that is the most natural reading of the text as well. What was the period where Abraham had some doubt and waver? Well, that is a wonderful euphemism, Matt. Where Abraham resorted to self-help to have a child when he seemed to grow weary in waiting for a while, and so Ishmael was the result of that. What was some bad time for Moses? Which time? How about Elijah? Well, you already mentioned that he's near suicidal, that he's having a depression. I've heard it very uncomplimentarily described from the pulpit as a pity party down there at Sinai, because he leaves the country, goes all the way down to where God gave the law to Moses, and he goes down there in a state of utter depression, doesn't he? And how many of us from time to time hadn't wanted, if we had access to Mount Sinai, how many of us would go down there and just go feel sorry for ourselves down there by ourselves? We'd probably have to take a number, because there'd already be somebody up there in the cleft of the rock doing what? Same thing, right? How many people would be in line to walk up on Sinai and have their Elijah moment? How about Jeremiah? Jeremiah says, it'd be better if my mother had never given birth, if my father had remained childless. Peter, what's his low moment? So I don't think it's a slander or a mark on John. And I do think his situation is extraordinary. I will compare, I think, and then I notice Ben wants to talk. I will compare this to the apostles themselves. Even after Jesus was resurrected from the dead, and he was just weeks away from really empowering them with the keys of the kingdom to which he'd promised them, and they're going to unlock the kingdom, as it were, if I could stretch the metaphor. They're going to unlock the kingdom with the keys of the gospel, and they're going to baptize thousands in 10 days. What did they ask on the way to the ascension? Are you now going to bring the kingdom to Israel? Because what kind of kingdom are they expecting? They're expecting that Roman clear out, temple cleansing kingdom, right? They're expecting even the apostles are expecting at that late date some kind of physical kingdom to come. Jesus is not at all on that path, and he crosses the apostles about it regularly. When a little bit later here in Luke, when Jesus says, "I'm going to go to Jerusalem and be rejected and suffer and die," what does Peter say? "Oh, yeah, no, you're not. We're not letting that happen." And so I think John, most likely, in my opinion of this, and what looks like then the most direct reading seems like a time of waver, a bad time. John is expecting something like that. This is one of his moments where he's like the apostles and says, "What's the plan here? This doesn't seem to be going by the plan. What are we doing?" Now, if you have a moment like that, what's the best thing to do? Ask Jesus. What does John do? In his worst moment, what does John do? He turns to Jesus. In his worst moment, what did Peter do? He denied Jesus, but then he did turn back. And so I think this is John's worst moment. But it's not, in the grand scheme of things, it's not all that bad a one, is it? And he's highly commended by the Lord. Penn? No. Right. He did well. He demonstrates. Yeah. He then goes on, right? That's right. That's right. So he well there is a demonstration and a lesson taught to the pair who came with the question, and then after they leave comes the great sermon of compliment and explaining to the people who and what John was. So let's look at how the question's answered. So we've asked what the question meant. Let's see how the question is answered. So they asked the same question as we had the verse above, and in that hour. So right then, you think about all the times Jesus said an hour is coming, or etc. In that hour, so right then, while they're there, Jesus healed many. So this is one of the 3 or 4 Jesus just heals everybody who's present type things. He heals many of diseases, plagues, and evil spirits. And so that was and on many who were blind. So he healed many blind people that day. So that is a massive outpouring of healing. I can't imagine what it must look like when scores or hundreds even of people who were hopelessly afflicted by these maladies, they're all cured, right? And as we talked about before with this compassionate aspect of miracles, the great compassion there, but also the emblematic portion of miracles, people are sick and plagued and possessed. And, these things tell us what are, they're physical conditions, but they have spiritual counterparts, or they're spiritual analogs to these things. The one who can heal your disease and your plague and your possession, he can heal you from sin, right? He can free you from the grip of the devil, both literal possession or sin in your life. So there's this emblematic thing. And the blind now can see. And so who gives us light, and who makes the lame to walk? And so he answered them. So Jesus spends some time healing dozens, scores, hundreds, pick your number. And now he says, go tell John what you saw and heard. And this is reminiscent of Zephaniah and Isaiah, as he says, the blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, The dead are raised. It doesn't say he raised a dead person that day, but the last story was the widow of Nain, and people know that. The poor have the good news preached to them. So amongst all these supernatural things is also a nearly supernatural compassion for poor people. And, under Jewish thought at this time, if you were poor, what did that mean? You must be sinful, you're not blessed to God. Because who does God bless? The people that are faithful. So if you're healthy and happy and wealthy, you must be the most blessed of all, right? And so kind of like the health and wealth gospel today, you name it, you claim it. Or somebody said, you blab it, you grab it, right? If you can grab it, that means you must be blessed. No, that's not how this works. The poor are the ones. And so then Jesus says, blessed are the ones who's not offended by me. So I'm coming and I'm doing things. I'm obviously doing things. I'm doing extraordinary things. I'm doing things the likes of which no one's ever seen. And it is reminiscent of the prophecies of what the Messiah would do. You can see this as being messianic. And like the blind man says over in John 9, who ever healed the blind? Nobody ever had. How many blind people has Jesus healed? Could have been dozens this day. And so, yes, I'm doing and I'm active and I'm powerful and yeah, I'm the Messiah. He says in all but exact words. But I'm not the one people are looking for. I'm not come as people are looking. So if you don't stumble over what I'm doing because you're instead wanting or expecting something else, you are blessed. So stick with me, folks. Everybody stick with me. This is going to turn out, right? And you think about how grand the Jews would have thought him running out the Romans and cleansing the temple and getting rid of those crooks and getting rid of the crooked Sanhedrin and getting rid of the hypocritical Pharisees. Just imagine if Jesus had cleansed the land of all that, right? And how happy would they have been? That's what they're expecting the Messiah to do. But he does something else entirely. But what he does is it better or worse? It's much better. He's doing something much better. But if you don't spiritually appraise things, what does it look like he's doing? If you physically appraise things, he's not doing much at all. And so, blessed is the one who is not offended by me. So, yeah, somebody or somebodies were having trouble and might be offended by Jesus, right? And that's the prophecy, what Psalm 118 say. It's the chief cornerstone, but it's also what? A stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. And so there are people who are falling over that, and Jesus said, please, look what I'm doing, and look at the work of God, and stick with me till you see what's really going on. All right, next time we'll go the message about John once those messengers had left, verse 24.